Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today, we're talking about cinematic sequences and B-roll. If you are watching this right now, then there is a good chance that you have seen maybe a video or two about how to shoot a cinematic sequence or what goes into getting B-roll, whether that be for vlogs, short films, client videos, or even for social media. If you have seen one of these tutorials, then you probably already know some of those obvious things, such as shooting in a high frame rate to get those buttery smooth slow motion shots, using some form of camera movement to get a more dynamic looking shot, adding a stylistic look to your footage using color grading, and finally adding a letterbox, also known as widescreen bars, to really drive that cinematic feel. But what if I told you that there are a handful of things that aren't covered in these tutorials that are often overlooked when shooting this type of content? Well, you probably want to know what I'm talking about, so let's get into that right now. Some of you may already be familiar with establishing shots. Essentially, the first shot of your video should be capturing the whole setting so that we know where the video takes place and we get some context going into the more detailed stuff throughout the cinematic sequence. But I am a firm believer that establishing the scene should go beyond just the first shot. Rather, you should take those first few shots to really dial in that context so that the viewer becomes more involved with what they're watching. For example, you can give the video more context by showing some small details that would otherwise be missed if you didn't explicitly point them out. Although these clips aren't related to the overall scene and the building of a motorcycle, they still give context as to the person who is building the motorcycles and gives you a feel for the space and the setting that you're in. But now let's get into some of the more technical things, beginning with one of my favorite techniques for really nailing focus. If you're shooting in a shallow depth of field and you want to really focus on something close up, maybe start back here and you want to go in slowly and stop on that subject, it is quite difficult to get it exactly the right distance where the subject will end in focus. Oftentimes you might go too far forward or you might not go far enough forward. It's really difficult to get that shot perfectly. Instead, what I like to do is start on my subject, have it in focus, hold it there for a few seconds, and then pull out. And then once that's done, you can reverse the clip, and now you have a nice push in with your subject perfectly in focus, and most people probably can't tell that the shot was reversed. The next thing I want to talk about is framing and composition. And one of my favorite things to do to get really interesting framing is to look at the objects around the room and see what I can use to frame my subject. For example, the first shot of the video, I used the doorway to frame the scene, and in this shot here, I was actually pointing the camera directly through the motorcycle. Don't be afraid to get really creative with this and see what you can come up with. The same idea can be applied to camera movement. A lot of the time we find ourselves just sticking to those basic slider motions like going back and forth, up and down, or side to side. Try mix in a few dynamic movements that you wouldn't normally get on a tripod or a slider, rotate the camera on a different axis, and really play around with getting some really bizarre, interesting looking shots. It'll make your cinematic sequence a lot more exciting to watch. Another thing to consider is to vary the length of your shots. Don't cut to the exact same beat of the song every single time because the brain will get used to that pattern and then it's not interesting. Instead, switch it up and cut on different beats and play around with the length of your shots. And on that same note, don't make your video too long. If you find that it's getting repetitive, then shorten it down. Short and sweet, leaving your audience wanting more is better than leaving it too long and then your audience being like, when is this going to be done, or just leaving before the video is done altogether. And my last piece of advice, and this is very important, is to edit on a 24p timeline. It's good to shoot in high frame rates so you can slow the footage down, but make sure you're editing on a 24p timeline because this looks a lot more natural to the eye and a lot more smooth and professional. 60p timelines are better for things like gaming and videos like that where you want really high speed, jolty action. When you're making a smooth professional video and you want to give it that clean cut vibe. You don't want to use a 60p timeline, instead use 24. It just looks a lot better. Now, because I know a lot of you are going to ask, the gear I used to shoot that cinematic sequence was my Sony a6300 with the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. I used a little Godox LED clip light to fill in some of those darker shots. And the one thing I absolutely recommend if you are shooting handheld is to get one of these. This is a battery grip. This one is made by a company called Newer, and I use it with my Sony a6300. Because the camera is so small and light, it is hard to be smooth and steady when filming handheld, and you'd be surprised how much better this will make your results because you're adding a little bit of weight and beef to the camera. Highly recommend it. All right, that's it for this video, guys. I think I covered everything. I hope I did. If you enjoyed it, please hit it with a thumbs up. Do not forget to subscribe. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you would like to see in the future, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.